If the Bible didn't always exist, how could early Christians have understood their God or religion since they didn't have the entire Bible for context? Hello and welcome to Noah's Snark. I'm your host, Atheist Josephina, aka AJV. Sorry for the click-baity title, but us atheists are really tired of seeing or hearing these 5 or 10 questions for atheists by Christian and Muslim content creators whose attempts at gotcha moments are truly embarrassing and pathetic. I'm not going to address any of their dumb questions. Dumb because the person asking doesn't bother to stop and think about what they're asking, and their questions have been covered by many other counter-apologists, and instead, I'm gonna throw apologists some dumb questions of my own, some of which, guess what, maybe ain't dumb. My questions might be limited in scope depending on who they're addressing, since apologists and believers in general, they can't agree on the answers, something you'll never hear them admit since that would pose a challenge to their beliefs. Obviously, believers can answer some of the questions I'm going to ask, but can they answer these questions honestly, or more importantly, factually? Let's see how apologists, how believers answer some of the questions I'm posing coming from an atheist. 1, and this one's for Christians in particular. I've heard an extraordinary amount of times, most recently from Jordan Peterson, that you can't understand God or what God wants for us without reading the Bible as a singular work. Without the context of the Bible in its entirety, you can't even begin to fully comprehend God or even Christianity. Christian apologists love to scream, you're taking things out of context when you cite a passage or story in a given book of the Bible because you need this other passage or other story from this other book of the Bible for what you're reading to make sense. Here's the problem with this line of thinking. The Bible hasn't always existed. It took approximately 400 years for the Bible to be canonized as it appears to us today. So, without the entirety of the Bible at their disposal, how were early Christians able to fully comprehend God or even their own religion? Within the decades following Jesus' death, it's reasonable to assume not all early Christians had access to all 4 Gospels. So, were they not able to fully comprehend the story of Christ? They may have been in a situation where some of them had access to maybe 2 of the Gospels and, say, the Gospels of Judas, which never became part of the Bible. Were those early Christians confused? And not only that, literacy rates were low in the ancient world. So most early Christians probably would have relied on other people to read them books of the Bible or tell them what these stories mean. And if there's one thing we know about human beings, it's that they never lie and never interpret things the way they want to in order to make them align with what they want to believe. The funniest thing about Christians saying you have to read the entirety of the Bible to be able to gauge the correct context for any given passage is that they'll be among the first ones to quote a Bible passage without discussing its context within the entirety of the Bible. If we read Psalms 136:1, for example, it says, "Give thanks unto the Lord, for his mercy endureth forever." Well, that sounds good on the face of it, but certainly not within the context of the rest of the Bible. So the basic question is, if the Bible didn't always exist, how could early Christians have understood their God or religion since they didn't have the entire Bible for context? And you know what else is wild? Apologist grifters like Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy still don't think you can understand the Bible without reading the most recent scholarship on it. Problem, did Michael Jones not fully understand the Bible before reading all the most recent scholarship on it? Anyway, that's all pretty wild for a God that wants you to know and love them, if you believe that about this God. Question number 2. Why can't there be another God that exists in the same way as Yahweh or Allah? What I mean is, some monotheists like to assert, with zero evidence, that God exists outside of space and time, which is nonsensical to say to begin with. Where is this locality, this outside of space and time? Nowhere? We can only have knowledge of what is of our universe, and literally no one has demonstrated how they can have knowledge of something outside of our universe. Maybe God uses magic to interject his presence into our universe, having started from no locality and no time? How does a being that is outside of space go anywhere? How does a being that doesn't experience time do anything? Maybe God resides in another dimension of space and time foreign to our own. That idea I can accept or get behind, but if that's the case, why is there only this one God there? How do we know there aren't other gods there? Maybe there are gods who made tan people, gods who made brown people, gods who made white people, a god of the electromagnetic force, a god of the weak and strong nuclear forces, a god of rainbows, etc. Even if God were in fact outside of space and time, and not in a different space and time, why can't any other entity be there outside of space and time? Because that's part of the definition of God? Like, definitions don't exist objectively, or at least there's no evidence of that being the case. It irritates me that theists say God is outside of space and time, while not knowing what that circumstance would actually look like. But it appears to be the case where someone once upon a time said it, probably Augustine spitballing off of Plato and Aristotle, and every other believer said, well, that sounds like it'll confuse skeptics, so we'll just keep saying it even though we have no idea what this would mean in reality. Question number 3. Theists like to believe God created the universe. Okay, what materials did God use and how did he do it? I just talked about God being outside of space and time, and if that's where God resides, so to speak, where did he get the materials to create the universe? Moreover, how did God create the universe? We all know the basic how of how a house is built. So how did God create the universe? What tools did he use? Did he simply say abracadabra? This, by the way, is how God could convince me of their existence, by demonstrating to me the materials and processes used to create the universe. Of course, an apologist will answer here that I couldn't possibly understand it, but I assume their God, if their God exists, could make me understand it. Would that not be within God's powers? If not, that places a notable restriction on God's powers. If doing that isn't logically possible because of maybe my biological construction, well, that's God's fault for making me in a way that makes his ways incomprehensible to me. If his ways are incomprehensible to me, to any of us, we can't actually know his ways are moral or good. Question number 4. If you're a believer who thinks people who reject God will spend an eternity in hell, well, why does God punish people infinitely for finite crimes? If someone never believes in God, apparently the one unforgivable sin in God's eyes, depending on your brand of faith, they can only not believe in God for 70 to 80 years on average. So why punish someone forever for 70 to 80 years of sin? A common defense is because God is infinite, the punishment is infinite. But that's just arbitrary reasoning. There's still no reason the punishment can't be finite unless God is perpetually offended due to his infiniteness, which contradicts Psalms 136:1 I mentioned earlier. Or maybe, and I'm just speculating here, God is eternally offended because our souls return to his being, assuming that's where we came from, but then the concept of hell simply wouldn't apply unless hell is a part of God's being. At any rate, infinite torture for finite crimes is not morally proportional, at least not from our purview. Yeah, I know, God's ways are higher than our own. Again, if that's the case, we can't know for certain those ways are any good. Question number 5. What exactly is heaven like? In order for me to be compelled to believe in and worship God, I want to know exactly what the reward is going to be like. If there's no reward, why believe in God? So what exactly is heaven like, and how do you know it? Do I still have a physical body? Can I have any kind of body I want? What happens to all the bacteria that helped make me me, by the way? Can I eat all I want and not become overweight? Will all my loved ones be there? Is heaven a city made of gold where there's no crime and I'm high as a kite all the time forever? Is it a place where all my desires are fulfilled, specific to my desires? I want to know exactly what heaven is like, and if you know or think you know, how do you know it? A lot of people think they know what heaven's like, and a lot of those ideas seem to be mutually exclusive. So those are my 5 questions no apologist can honestly answer. Or maybe they can honestly answer, but being honest does not necessarily equate with being factual. Anyway, thanks for listening. This has been Noah's Snark with me, AJV. Until next time, let evidence guide you and wonder inspire you.